Good day, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In this episode, I want to continue the ongoing coverage of the crisis going on between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The rhetoric continues to become heated. It would appear that Russian media outlets would lead one to presume that quite possibly a conflict is indeed imminent. Now, with that being said, I also look at some of the actions that are being taken by congressional leadership of both the GOP and the Democratic side of the equation as well. It's almost as if some of these key persons in leadership positions inside of the U.S. Congress, the Senate, don't remember the Cold War. They are under the impression for some reason that they are dealing with some third-rate military power, and unfortunately, this is going to could lead to a very, very serious miscalculation. The idea that, and again, this is coming from the Republican side of the House and the Senate. Some of the hawks have decided that it may be a good idea for the U.S. to actually move forces, actual combat units, into the Ukraine. So again, it would seem that these policymakers, these lawmakers, are looking at past conflict zones that the United States has entered. They're probably looking at the success that occurred in the Iraq War, the early stages of the Iraq War, outside of the lack of preparations for large-scale insurgency, operations that occurred, as in Kosovo over Serbia, and obviously just a continuation of the U.S. Utilizing hard military power against fairly insignificant opposing forces. So again, this is completely different. And unfortunately, it would seem that those members of the political leadership inside of the United States that are driving some of this in a demand to send U.S. forces to the Ukraine are really, and I just have to be frank, they are complete idiots. And the idea that the U.S. could even win in a military conflict in the Ukraine is absurd. The United States really hasn't done a reforger exercise. I don't know when the last one was done. I mean, it's been decades, and I don't even know if the apparatus right now even exists. The infrastructure exists to quickly move forces from the United. Matter of fact, I know it doesn't exist to move forces to Europe, and then obviously from a staging area in probably Germany or some other place in Poland to the Ukraine would it simply isn't going to happen. It's impossible. Not before the Russians take significant amounts of territory, and the uh, if you do see a conflict, if we enter into a period of conflict with the Russian Federation, well, the first thing the Russians are going to do is they're going to seize the Baltics, and that's not going to take very much effort. And again, that's going to trigger a NATO response, which isn't going to occur either. I mean, you really think the Germans are going to go to war with Russia over Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia? And it looks like boy, they're really falling into a trap right now in terms of what could happen with this. And naturally, you're seeing a very vigorous and robust alliance starting to take shape between the Russians and the Chinese. And obviously, the Chinese have territorial claims. Taiwan is a big issue, and again, uh, you see other things that are happening. You see the Russian military shoot down satellites. So again, you have both the Chinese and the Russians preparing for a quite possible large-scale conflict with the United States. So they're shooting down satellites where they can take down the U.S. GPS system, global positioning satellites. That eliminates the U.S. ability to launch JDAMs and a whole host of weapon systems that the United States has really started to rely upon. And if they are able to shoot down enough GPS satellites, those JDAMs and a lot of other assets go out the window, and you're back to flying over a target with a laser guided bomb in some cases. But again, the concept that we could move some token forces into the Ukraine. So, and again, if you know your history, if you go back to, I don't know, 1987, and I don't think anybody in a million years would have, one, thought that NATO would have expanded the way it has, uh, such as into Poland and other places as well. But once the NATO and the United States accepted Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and given the economic situation that Russia was in at the time, they, meaning they, NATO, really crossed the proverbial Rubicon. At some point, uh, I don't know if Slick Willie in the Clinton administration was aware that at some point Russia is going to uh, regain its posture, was going to rebuild its military, have a ex KGB officer in charge of the country who is incredibly resentful of this NATO expansion that occurred. I mean, if you almost have to look at it from, you really have to, you really do. You have to look at it from the Russian side of this. And let's say for some reason that there was an economic collapse in the United States, and Russia had won the Cold War, and we were seeing Russian assets being moved into Mexico and Canada, and I mean, you could almost look at it as if, like, if Texas were to have removed itself from the United States, and I don't know, let's say that the Mexican population in Texas got to a certain point where there was a referendum where they decided to become its own separate entity and remove itself, and then you started to see Russian forces moving into Texas. I mean, you almost have to look at it that way, because again, from the context of going back to the Cold War back in the 80s. I know it's outrageous. I know the whole concept of, obviously Texas succeeding in succession, and then Russian assets on the ground in Texas is nonsensical, right? But again, if you go back to the 80s and you look at the situation that presented itself in the 80s, you would have never in a million years thought there would be NATO assets on the ground in Ukraine, and there are right now, and that is a red line for Russia, and they've said so. But it would appear the West is pushing this, and obviously the Ukrainians hold a great amount of animosity for the Russians at this point in time. But it is just this perfect storm. I mean, it's something out of Red Storm Rising or a Clancy novel that we're really starting to see right now. And again, You look at Russia and you think about the post-Soviet collapse, and you think about the predicament that the Russian military was in the late 90s and very very early 2000s. But that is not they are not in that situation now. They have really done a very good job in rebuilding their capabilities in their military, and they're looking at what's happening, especially in the Ukraine. I mean, these two people are kissing cousins, and they've inherently have been very very close to each other, and most Ukrainians speak Russian, and it's just something that I don't think the West truly understands. And again, therein lies the miscalculation that is occurring. I don't know how many. I don't know what Putin is doing. He continues to do these military moves towards the Ukrainian border. Um, we do know that the exercises that the Russian military has been conducting over the past 10 years has been much more significant than any sort of military exercises that you see in the West. You see huge, huge numbers of forces being flexed both east and west. You see multi-divisional operations by the Russian Federation. You don't see that in Western countries. You don't see it with the United States. I don't know when's the last time the United States has done a multi-divisional operation. I'm not even sure if we've atrophied to such a point right now that we're even capable of a fairly quick reforger into Western Europe, and the Russians see that, and again they hold a great deal of anger at what has happened, especially with the expansion of NATO. So again, not taking sides, but again trying to look at it from the side of the potential adversary. But the whole concept that the West could fight a war in especially eastern Ukraine. Now I doubt the Russians are going to go into western Ukraine, but the idea of them taking the eastern half of the Ukraine. Again, this is very flat. It's ideal for large mechanized operations, which the Russians excel at. Again, harken back to the Battle of Kursk. I mean, this is an animal that I don't even think. Again, the average United States citizen just has no concept of what could happen in this conflict and just how big it could get and nasty it could get. And the Russians right now are most definitely more prepared for a very large scale conflict in eastern Ukraine, quite possibly an operation into the Baltics. If it really gets out of control, you could see that. And then if the Baltics are seized, the question is there going to be enough unity in NATO to launch an operation to retake the Baltics? And I say no. I don't believe it's militarily possible. It's militarily possible right now, especially the way the Germans have let their military atrophy. The UK has let its military atrophy. I do not believe the Turks, however they are members of NATO, are going to come to the aid of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Simply ridiculous. And if no one comes to the aid of these Baltic states, if things really get carried away, then NATO's gone. It ceased to exist. It'll become something different, and that could absolutely happen. And I think Putin is just savvy enough to know that. I mean, quite literally, we could be very quickly looking at World War III if some of these red lines are crossed, and these supposed red lines that the Putin has put into place But right now, the buildup that is going on, and you don't really hear too much of it in the mainstream media. So again, this could come out of nowhere. Again, I don't think we're probably looking at a grab of the entire state of the Ukraine. I don't know if the Russians are ready for that yet and have the capability to do that. They could obviously take areas of eastern Ukraine. They could take the Baltics, but they would really need to start recalling reserves and expanding the size of the existing Russian military if they were looking at a drive to seize all of the Ukraine. So that's probably not going to happen, but at the same time, we continue to see some fairly significant military activity over really along multiple areas of the Russian Federation near the borders of NATO, and we haven't seen this kind of heated rhetoric and this kind of operational tempo in terms of military moves in many 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 years, and we could be at the precipice of something incredibly significant in history. But we'll continue to watch and report. Have a good day, everybody.